reviewed, and ranked. Over the course of the past year, we have looked at 51 different characters, 32 characters from the base roster, 4 unlockable reward characters, 2 free DLC characters, and 13 paid DLC characters. Today, we will be covering the 14th and final character in the roster to break down just how good the character is and finish off our character tier list. Today, we will be finishing the reviewed and ranked series by having a look at Thanos Infinite. And this character hits like a freight train, and we'll have a much closer look at the character's capacities over the course of today's video. Now, if you enjoyed today's character breakdown, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, as that greatly helps me out. And please feel free to check out some of my other variety content that I provide on a daily basis. And if today's video is helpful, enjoyable, and/or interesting, make sure that you hit that like button. So Thanos Infinite is going to get the same treatment in terms of reviewing the character as everyone else that we've looked at up until this point. And that, of course, starts with the team build synergies. Now, Thanos Infinite actually is the exact same as Thanos in a lot of the base features of the character. For example, all of the team build synergies are identical. There are 3 vitality synergies with villains, gods and demons, and Ultimate Alliance 3. There is a defense synergy with family values, and there is an energy synergy with team leaders. In addition to the team build synergies, all of the alternate costumes for Thanos also apply to Thanos Infinite, so you don't need to track down anything different for the one character versus the other. That's about where the similarities lie, apart from the fact that their base model is the same with the addition of an Infinity Gauntlet for the Thanos Infinite. There's a lot of unique functionality moving on from that point. And his abilities do have a degree of reminiscence to them compared to standard Thanos, but all of his abilities are dialed up to the extreme level due to the fact that he has the Infinity Stones at his disposal. Now, because of Thanos Infinite's possession of the Infinity Stones, he cannot be given a customized ISO 8 loadout. So you do have to keep in mind that this is as good as the character can get, but there's still a lot of power that he boasts, despite the fact that he cannot be further bolstered with custom ISO 8s. He is also immune to being staggered out by electrical effects or frozen. We'll now pivot over and talk about the base functions of the character. Thanos Infinite's basic attack sequence comprises of 5 different strikes that all activate on individual button presses. The first 4 strikes of his combo involve a couple of wide swinging punches and a large kick, and that 5th strike involves a series of reality spires being summoned up from the ground in a linear fashion out away from the character, and there are 4 different spires that raise up at that point in time, and they make physical contact with your opponents, which will deter any of the opponents in the immediate vicinity of Thanos Infinite from retaliating against you. But with as powerful as these strikes are, you will hardly ever be using the standard attack sequence, because Thanos Infinite just has better options in his arsenal in terms of being faster or dealing more damage, or a combination of both. So I appreciate the attention to detail that was given here, but functionally, you shouldn't really be using the basic attack sequence. And that's where we come to an attack that you'll probably be seeing yourself use with a lot more frequency, and that is Thanos Infinite's heavy attack. Now, with his heavy attack, he chronal warps himself with the use of the Time Stone and unleashes a flurry of 6 different rapid strike punches and moves forward a little bit, provided that he's not bashing up against an opponent that meets him with some sort of resistance. These strikes deal a fair amount of damage, and they're also fairly good at wearing down the remainder of stagger bars, but there's better uses for rendering opponents vulnerable to follow-up attacks. However, because of the speed of this heavy attack sequence, he does regain a fair amount of energy points, so if you do happen to find yourself in a situation where you've depleted the majority of your store, then throwing out a couple of heavy attacks is going to be something highly beneficial for you in order to get yourself back in the fight. Thanos Infinite does have a teleport on his double jump, which he uses the Space Stone to project himself a little bit further forward. However, it is slower than other teleports in the cast that we've seen. It's actually one of the slowest teleports, if not the slowest teleport available amongst the entire roster. It's okay for traversing around the area, but if you're looking for the fastest teleport style movement, I've said it before, I'll say it again, Nightcrawler still wears the crown in that realm. But it is something to keep in mind because Thanos Infinite can get out of some stickier situations when compared to other tank-type characters in the cast. Thanos Infinite's falling aerial is a double-fisted slam down onto the ground, and you can kind of see an effect from the Reality Stone that emanates in a wave out around the focal point of impact. Of course, the focal point of damage for that falling aerial is right where Thanos slams into the ground, though opponents that are in the immediate vicinity will have some damage applied to them as he lands. However, there's not a whole lot of instances where you're going to want to use this. The best application that I've found is if you need to close the gap between yourself and a couple of the final straggler type enemies, you can warp towards them out of a teleport double jump and then slam down onto the ground to either knock down the grunt type enemies or serve as a combo introduction, because you can use that falling aerial into any of Thanos' abilities, into any of Thanos Infinite's abilities, or even a standard heavy attack sequence, as that is the better of the two base attack features that we have looked at up to this point. And for the block and dodge animation, we have a similar stance to that of regular Thanos, where he will brace one singular arm up in front of himself. It is the arm that bears the Infinity Gauntlet, and as you dodge out of the way, you do see a little bit of that chronal shift as he dashes in the direction that you choose to send him, inspiring that the Time Stone is used to help get him out of trouble when he is confronting different opponents. So if we now pivot over and talk about the abilities that Thanos Infinite possesses, we're going to find that the entirety of his kit boasts a lot of power and also has two different variations of the attack. There is the standard variation of the ability, and then there is the fully charged variation of the ability. It is also incredibly important to note that Thanos Infinite cannot synergize any of his abilities with any other members of the cast, and when you see the beneficial effects from unleashing fully charged versions of these attacks, it makes a lot of sense as to why that can't be done, because not only is the charge time frame pretty significant, but it also allows him to deal substantial amounts of damage to his opponents when they are in their fully charged form. So the first ability is the Chronal Disruption. This involves Thanos using the Time Stone and the Power Stone to dash forward in a series of powerful high-speed attacks. And if you fully charge this ability, you can create two reality clones that will dash out in a fan along with you, covering more ground. Now, there's not a whole lot of instances where it's better to use the fully charged version of this attack. It's somewhat decent to use off the start of fights before your opponents start moving around a lot. There's also instances where this is beneficial to use once you have clumped opponents together in one focal area, but even then, you're better off just using a standard application of the Chronal Disruption to dash through those opponents, as opposed to holding out for those additional Reality Stone clones. And during the dashing animations of the Chronal Disruption, Thanos Infinite is completely impervious to damage. He cannot take any damage or be knocked down while he is in that dash. So it's a fairly good tool to get out of danger if you find yourself surrounded on all sides by opponents. Or one of my favorite areas to use that is to get around the time distortions that are used by Thanos and Thane in the climactic fights at the end of the story quest. Because if you're charging that attack at all while time is frozen, all you need to do is release that button during that time frame and you will dash through the large area of effect attacks that those characters tend to carry out as a result of that attack. The Chronal Disruption has the melee attack type and has some fairly decent stats, having a C classification to damage dealt, a D classification to energy points consumed, and an A classification to stagger damage dealt. This is by far the best option that Thanos has in his arsenal for depleting those stagger gauges, so you'll find yourself using this ability with a fair amount of frequency. And as the Chronal Disruption is ranked up, it benefits from a reduced energy point cost, an increase to the attack damage dealt, an increase to the stagger damage dealt, and finally a reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Now that is the same for 2 of his other abilities. There is one that has a slight and minor adjustment. We will touch on that when we get to it. Thanos Infinite's second ability is No Escape. And this one boasts a lot of power for a couple of different reasons. I do think that it has some shortcomings, and we will talk about that. Now, No Escape will block enemy movement with the Space Stone and use the Reality Stone to lift up spires and attack into the opponents. And if you continue to hold and charge this attack, you will be able to absorb health back from those opponents that are trapped within the sphere of influence with the Soul Stone. And this is pretty beneficial as it locks down the opponents in kind of a prism type cell. It's a similar effect to what you see in Thanos' boss fight, though it manifests in a very different way. And that allows your team members to layer in some additional chip damage to those opponents that are immobilized over the course of your charge of this attack. And it can get to the point where it freezes the mighty enemies, but it's not a guarantee and generally takes a while longer in that charge, to the point where if they are immobilized at all, it's not for nearly as long as a time as any of the grunts are. It does have its benefits though, especially if you have a lot of opponents focalized down in one singular area, but the ability that does that can just as efficiently have you mow through them by using the Chronal Disruption. So there's really niche applications for the No Escape, apart from using it because it's visually striking and has a little bit of a higher vertical reach when compared to some of the other abilities that Thanos Infinite has. But there are very, very few and unique circumstances where the opponents are up at a higher elevation to the point where they can't be struck with other abilities. One of those specifically that comes to mind is the Ebony Maw fight in the closing gauntlet of the game, where when he reaches his second phase, he does levitate and use the Soul Stone to siphon some energy back towards himself from the members of your group. Now, you can get some additional damage in by using the No Escape if you position yourself right below Ebony Maw, but it's not a game changer by any means. The No Escape has the melee attack type and has C classifications to both damage and stagger damage dealt, while maintaining a D classification to the energy points consumed when using this ability. And apart from being really flashy and very well animated, you probably won't see yourself using this ability very much at all. Thanos Infinite's third ability is the Soul Siphon, and this ability, it looks fairly meager in its initial introduction, but it boasts an insane amount of power and practicality, especially when you take into consideration its ability to encourage follow-ups from yourself and other members of your team. And for that reason, the Soul Siphon, of all of the abilities that Thanos Infinite possesses, the Soul Siphon is the one that I personally believe deserves the DLC Privilege Award. And when you look at its stats, it's kind of confusing as to why I would say that, because it's not very impressive stat-wise. It deals F tier damage, which is easily the worst in terms of the damage that Thanos Infinite can deal, and takes as much energy points to unleash as any of the other abilities that Thanos Infinite possesses. However, it's the secondary effect that really pushes this to the forefront. So Thanos Infinite will use the Mind Stone to create an area that will absorb energy points back to Thanos and only Thanos. So it's not like Phoenix's ability where she will disperse that amongst the entire team. This only applies to Thanos himself. But if you continue to hold down the button to its full charge, you can absorb health along with energy points and create a gravitational warp that will draw the opponents into the influence of that attack, and it has a very wide range. So it draws the opponents into a centralized focal point, it restores your health and your energy points, allowing you to relay additional attacks, and except for in the rare instances where the game kind of glitches out and doesn't render it, it does give you a reticle that allows you to place it wherever you feel is best, and it doesn't have a finite range other than the timer that it has for the startup. And as you can see in the footage that I've been looping here, it has about a 10-second duration either way once the effect has been unleashed, and with the amount of time and pull that that attack has to draw the opponents into the center, you can then follow up with the no escape ability if you want to wipe the opponents in style, or you can dash in and out of the sphere of influence of the Soul Siphon using the Chronal Disruption, which tends to be the faster method due to the long charge up animation of even the standard application of the no escape ability. Either way, the Soul Siphon boasts a lot of power with the versatility that it provides, and I think that it is highly worthy of the DLC Privilege Award in Thanos Infinite's kit of abilities. This attack has the energy attack type and has the slight variation to the rank up abilities of having 2 reductions in the energy point cost and an increase to the attack damage, and finally that reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Thanos Infinite's final ability is the Infinite Power, and this ability has some fairly niche applications, but I personally don't use it a whole lot because there are better and easier things you can do with the amount of power that you have with the other abilities and attack combos that you can do with Thanos Infinite. But it is worth mentioning because it is very unique in terms of what it's capable of doing. So the Infinite Power will release a potent beam of energy using the Power Stone, and in its standard iteration it just launches that straight out in front of Thanos, whichever direction he's facing when the button is pressed. However, if you hold this to its full charge, you will incorporate the Mind Stone into the attack, as well as change it to a wide sweeping arc from right to left out front of where Thanos Infinite is standing, and any mighty enemies that are within that area will have their stagger gauge overridden. It doesn't deplete it, but it sends them into the pre-stagger animation, where you can then follow up with an ability or a synergy attack from the other members of your team to then put them in that full stun. I have in certain circumstances gotten it to work against mini-boss characters, but it's not super reliable, so I wouldn't really recommend using it in that sense of the word, but it has the furthest amount of reach from where Thanos is standing of all of the abilities in his kit. This ability has the energy attack type and has a B classification to damage dealt, while maintaining D classifications to energy points consumed and stagger damage dealt, and has the same rank up bonuses as the other abilities minus the Soul Siphon. Now, Thanos Infinite's extreme attack has probably the longest duration out of any of the extreme attacks that we've looked at up until this point, but it does have a counterbalance to that as well. So Thanos Infinite will cycle through the different Infinity Stones when activating this attack. He first sets up an area of influence with the Mind Stone, which transitions briefly into the Soul Stone, which you really can't tell because the colors are fairly similar, but that's the swirling vortex that you see active during the entire duration of the move. And the combination of Mind and Soul will burst any of the stagger bars that the opponents within the area of influence have, and they will go straight from whatever stage they were in to fully stunned, as well as have that stun paused for the duration of the extreme attack from Thanos Infinite. So this is a really good tool for getting around particularly difficult attack sequences from many boss type characters. There's only a few that are immune to that type of extreme attack, and they're the fairly obvious ones that have very unique stagger animations. Sandman and Dormammu are the primary boss characters that come to mind that are not affected by the extreme attack detonation from Thanos Infinite. He then conjures up large and exaggerated manifestations of the space, time, and reality stones out in front of him, and finally transitions into the Power Stone, which he uses to draw those large manifestations down into the ground for a large area of effect, slam, burst type damage. So a lot of power packed into this extreme ability, in addition to the perks of the ability being able to fully stun and pause the stun duration of those opponents. So generally what I recommend doing when you have Thanos Infinite on your team and you're making use of the extreme attacks is using Thanos Infinite's extreme attack first and then quickly detonating the remainder of your attacks, or taking a moment to make sure that you've corrected the other characters into the ideal targeting zone for carrying out this ability. And the same warning and caution goes for Thanos Infinite here, where he will initiate this attack in the direction that he is facing and carry it out to its completion once it has been detonated. He will not change or adjust, though there is a fairly wide area of influence out in front of him and in his immediate vicinity to opponents that will be subject to the effects of the attack. But the bulk of the damage is the area where the exaggerated manifestations of the Infinity Stones are slammed down into the ground. So if you want to maximize your damage from Thanos Infinite's extreme attacks specifically, make sure that the opponents that you want to deal the most damage to, ideally the boss characters, are within that focal range of that slam area. So now that we have taken a step back and broken down Thanos Infinite's entire kit and how he works, it's time for us to determine where he belongs in our character tier list. And it's no surprise, based off of what we've looked at and the amount of unique aspects to this character, that he is within the S tier of characters. I mean, he's just capable of so much more than anybody else in the lower tiers. And a lot of that power, even though he cannot synergize his attacks with the rest of his team, nor have custom ISOs applied to him specifically, it's all fairly negligible in terms of the scope of what he is capable of offering. So not only is it not a huge surprise that he belongs in the S tier of characters, but he also belongs at the top of S tier. I mean, the whole reason that I decided to get into speedrunning this game is because of Thanos Infinite and what he was capable of doing, and he's still very involved in the speedruns for New Game Plus specifically, because there's just not any applications for him in other versions of speedruns currently being used. But he's incredibly powerful and honestly kind of throws everything else out of balance outside of the few things that he's had done to kind of rein him in and make him not too overpowered in terms of working in tandem with other team members. But what do you think? Do you agree with my adjudication that Thanos is the best character in the game, or do you feel like I'm overhyping him or missed something about his kit that knocks him down a peg or two? Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below, and thank you so much for joining me for the Reviewed and Ranked series over the past year. It's been a ton of fun, and I look forward to having more of these commentary type videos in the coming weeks. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.